His husband returned after 3 years abroad, bringing with him his mistress and a child. She silently handed him the divorce papers and walked away with her secret fortune. For 3 long years of waiting, Eleanor believed he would return covered in glory. But the day Alexander Alex Thorne showed up, it was only to bring his mistress and his son to the home they had once dreamed of together. She didn't cry, didn't reproach him. She simply placed a divorce petition and the apartment's deed on the coffee table. No one knew that the woman they criticized for being a mere kept wife was, in fact, the mysterious founder of Silk Soul, a luxury, high-fashion brand. She possessed a fortune capable of shaking all of New York City. The night he betrayed her was also the night she was reborn, abandoning the past with a serene smile and a wealth the entire world would admire. If you're watching this video, please like, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments where you're watching my story of revenge from. I want to know how far it has reached. Eleanor Vance looked at the wall clock. It was 7:00. The aroma of red wine braised beef short ribs, Alex's favorite dish, permeated the entire apartment. On the dining table, a bowl of clam chowder was still steaming, next to a carefully presented side of sautéed broccoli with garlic and prosciutto. Everything was perfect, like the love she had strived to cultivate for years. 3 years, 195 days since Alex had left for San Francisco to pursue what he called the project of the century, and 195 nights she had waited alone in that spacious apartment for his rushed phone calls. He had said that this project would be the launch pad for him to become the most prestigious chief architect in Manhattan, so she could live a life of carefree opulence. She had believed him, just as she had always believed in their love since their university days. She stood up and walked toward the large window, contemplating the bustling traffic of Fifth Avenue in Manhattan. The neon lights reflected on her delicate face, a face that showed subtle signs of weariness from the waiting, but one that couldn't conceal its tenderness. During those 3 years, she had grown accustomed to doing everything alone, repairing leaky faucets, changing light bulbs, going to the hospital by herself when she was sick. She had transformed from a sheltered young woman into a terrifyingly independent one, but deep in her heart, she still yearned for the warmth of his embrace. Today he was coming back. A week earlier, he had called her in an unusually cheerful tone to announce that the project had concluded with resounding success, and that he would be promoted and transferred back to the headquarters. "I'm coming home." Those 3 simple words had made her heart tremble. She had spent a week cleaning the house, hand-washing all the linens, and today she had spent the entire afternoon in the kitchen preparing his favorite dishes. The doorbell rang, interrupting her thoughts. Her heart skipped a beat. It was him. She took a deep breath, trying to contain the emotion that overwhelmed her, and hurried to open the door. She wanted to greet him with her most radiant smile, with the warmest embrace. The door opened. Alex stood there with his tall figure and familiar and angular face, but the look he gave her was strange, evasive. He was wearing an expensive suit, looking much more mature and successful than 3 years ago. But Eleanor's attention didn't linger on him for long, because standing just behind him was another woman, a woman with an oval face and large, round eyes, with a fragile, pitiful appearance. She wore an immaculate white dress, and what left Eleanor petrified was that in the woman's arms was a small child. The boy, about 2 years old, was sleeping deeply, and his features bore an astonishing resemblance to Alex's. Time seemed to stop. The warm atmosphere of the home turned icy in an instant. Not even the delicious aroma of the food could mask the stench of betrayal that now permeated the air. Alex cleared his throat, breaking the oppressive silence. He walked into the house without looking directly into her eyes. "Eleanor, this is Lucy Miller, and this is Matthew, my son." Eleanor said nothing. Her gaze shifted from the stranger's face to the sleeping child. "My son." 4 words that felt like 4 daggers plunging into her heart. 3 years of waiting in exchange for another woman and a secret child. Lucy lowered her head, her voice trembling and heavy with supposed guilt. "Mrs. Vance, I'm sorry. I didn't want to destroy your family." Alex frowned and pulled Lucy behind him in a protective gesture. "You don't have to apologize. The fault is mine, Eleanor. I know this is very sudden, but Lucy has sacrificed a lot for me these past 3 years in San Francisco. She's the one who understood and supported me in my career, and the child needs to be acknowledged. From now on, they will live here. I hope you can understand. He rattled off a lengthy speech where every word was an excuse for himself and a total nullification of her sacrifices. He expected her to understand. He thought she would cry, make a scene, get jealous like any other woman. But Eleanor did none of that. Her composure disconcerted Alex. There were no tears, no reproaches. She just looked at him in silence with a gaze as deep and serene as an autumn lake. That look made Alex feel guilty, while Lucy unconsciously clutched the child tighter in her arms. Then Eleanor slowly turned and walked toward the master bedroom. Alex and Lucy exchanged glances, and a flicker of triumph mixed with disdain appeared in their eyes. They believed she had accepted her fate, that a simple, jobless housewife had no choice but to endure, but they were wrong. Minutes later, Eleanor emerged. In her hands, she carried neither a knife nor a suitcase, but a blue folder. She walked up to the coffee table and placed it down gently. Her voice, clear and cold, resonated in the silence. Here is the divorce petition. I've already signed it. She looked up and stared directly into Alex's stupefied face before articulating one last sentence, enunciating every syllable. Sign it and get out of my house. Silence seized the living room. Alex stared intently at the folder on the table, then at Eleanor's expressionless face, as if trying to process if he had heard correctly. Get out of my house. A wave of anger replaced his initial astonishment. He felt his male pride trampled. Eleanor, what game are you playing? He exclaimed, his tone mixing rage and mockery. Who do you think you are to kick me out? Look at you. You've been home for 3 years doing nothing. Everything in this house, from a toothpick to the sofa, this life of luxury, I achieved with my hard work. Divorce? What are you going to live on? His words triggered Eleanor's memories, making her relive images of the past. That day, under the shade trees on the university campus, young Alex, in his white shirt, had taken her hand and, with eyes bright with hope, told her, Eleanor, one day I'll be a great architect. I'll build you the most beautiful house in the world, and we'll have a happy family. Eleanor was then the star of the fashion design department. Her creations left professors speechless. She had a promising future. Major firms were fighting over her even before graduation. But because of Alex's promise, because of the love she professed for him, she gave it all up. She rejected tempting offers and agreed to stay in the background, becoming his unconditional support so he could focus on his career. She believed her sacrifice was worth it. The day he was offered the position in San Francisco, he hugged her tightly and promised her, wait for me, just 3 years, only 3. When I return, I'll make it all up to you. The first year, he called her daily, telling her about the difficulties and pressures of being in a new city. She listened patiently, comforting and encouraging him. The second year, the calls became less frequent, just a few per week. He said he was too busy, that meetings dragged on until the early morning, and he didn't want to wake her. Instead, he started sending her expensive gifts, designer bags, diamond jewelry, but Eleanor never used them. What she needed was his attention, not inanimate objects. In the third year, the calls could be counted on one hand, each with barely a few superficial questions. His voice became increasingly distant. Feminine intuition told her something was wrong. She had deceived herself into thinking he was just too focused on work, but deep down, a crack had begun to open in her heart. She had contemplated the worst-case scenario, and that divorce petition was her preparation for this day. What she didn't expect was for it to arrive in such a cruel and brazen manner. The torrent of memories stopped. Eleanor returned to reality and looked at the man before her, the man she once loved with all her soul. There was no pain left in her gaze, only a faint irony. She didn't argue with him about money. Words were now superfluous. She silently walked toward a wooden dresser in the corner of the living room. She opened a drawer and pulled out another folder protected by plastic. She returned and placed it on top of the divorce petition. You're right, she said with the same calm. Everything in this house was bought with money, but not yours. Alex frowned, confused. What nonsense are you talking about? Eleanor didn't answer. She simply pushed the folder toward him with her long, slender finger. Open it and see. Alex, skeptical yet curious, took it. Inside was a document slightly yellowed with age. As he read the heading, his pupils contracted. It was the deed to the apartment. The address listed was that of this very apartment, but what took his breath away was the owner's name. There was only one clearly printed, Eleanor Vance, and in the bottom corner the registration date, June 15th, 7 years ago. The day before they got married, Alex stood rigid as a statue. This apartment, which he had always prided himself on as the fruit of his effort, which he boasted about to his friends, the foundation upon which he demanded her submission, had been her property since before their marriage. Legally, it was a separate asset. He had no rights to it whatsoever. He abruptly lifted his head, staring at her in disbelief. All the arrogance, anger, and self-satisfaction vanished from his face, leaving only bewilderment and absolute shock. He opened his mouth to say something, but his throat seemed constricted by an invisible hand. He couldn't utter a single sound. The room was plunged into a deathly silence. The property deed lay on the table like a silent accusation of Alex's arrogance. His face went from white to green. Confusion and humiliation were evident in his gaze. At that moment, Lucy, who had been silently standing behind Alex, burst into tears. Her tears rolled down her cheeks. Her pitiful sobs broke the tense atmosphere. She stepped forward, looking at Eleanor with tear-filled eyes. "Mrs. Vance, I know it's all my fault. I'm not asking for your forgiveness, nor do I want to destroy your family. I just hope. My son Matthew, he is innocent. He needs his father. We only ask for a small corner in this house to take care of him. I don't need any official recognition. I beg you, have mercy on the child." The performance was flawless. Every word, every gesture exuded calculated vulnerability, as if she were the biggest victim. Alex, as if waking from a trance, used Lucy's drama as an excuse to regain his composure and unleash his fury. He roughly pushed her aside and yelled at Eleanor in an overbearing voice, "Eleanor, don't be so cruel. Can't you see? Lucy is being incredibly humble. She's just asking for a place for my son. Do you really have to be so ruthless? Don't think that just because you own this apartment, you have everything. When we divorce, what will you live on? A jobless woman who for years has only known how to cook and clean. Do you think life out there is easy? Without my financial help, you won't even be able to afford 3 meals a day." His wounded pride made his words increasingly hurtful. He had completely forgotten their years of marriage. All that remained was contempt for the woman he believed was dependent on him. "I truly wonder if you were in my place, what would you do? Would you choose to be quiet to maintain peace, or would you dare to face everything to reclaim your voice? I want to know your opinion because every story is like a candle that can light the way for someone else." Eleanor didn't get angry. She found it ridiculous. She slowly looked up. Her knife-sharp gaze swept over Alex's indignant face and stopped on the tearful Lucy. Without saying a word, she turned and walked toward the bedroom they shared. Alex thought his words had hurt her and that she was going to cry. A cold smile appeared on his lips, but once again he was wrong. Eleanor opened the large closet, pointing to the left side, where a few of her own clothes hung. They were all neutral colors, simple designs, ordinary fabrics, some even worn out. Their total value probably didn't cover the cost of one of Alex's dinners at a fancy midtown restaurant. Then she abruptly opened the right side. A completely different world appeared. Dozens of designer suits, perfectly ironed shirts, silk ties of every color meticulously arranged. Below, gleaming leather shoes and a box with several limited edition watches that sparkled. His entire wardrobe smelled of money and luxury. Eleanor turned and looked him straight in the eyes. Her voice wasn't loud, but every word was like a hammer blow to his chest. "Alex, in 3 years, apart from the money for basic expenses you sent me every month, I haven't spent a single cent of yours on myself. Look at my clothes. Do you see anything of value? And you, these suits, these watches, who bought them for you with your money? I have no right to ask, but with what right do you lecture me about finances?" Her words left him speechless, his face flushed with rage and shame. It was true, he always sent her a fixed amount, barely enough for bills and basic groceries. Meanwhile, he was splurging money on luxuries to build his image as a successful architect. He never thought Eleanor would notice. Just then his phone rang. He grabbed it as if it were a lifeline. It was his mother. As soon as he answered, the woman's shrill voice boomed, "Alex, son, I heard you're back." that Eleanor is giving you a hard time. Son, it's normal for a man to have his flings. As a wife, she should be more understanding for the good of everyone. Tell her that if she behaves, the Thorne family won't treat her badly. After all, that child is my grandson." Before he could respond, Eleanor snatched the phone. She put it to her ear. Her voice was icy. "Mrs. Thorne, don't worry. Your precious son and your grandson, I don't need either of them. Our matters will be resolved by us." Having said that, without waiting for a reply, she abruptly hung up. She threw the phone at him. Her gaze no longer contained a shred of affection. The atmosphere in the apartment became dense, almost unbreathable. His mother-in-law's call was the last straw for Eleanor's patience. She didn't want to waste another second in that place with those people. She took out her own cell phone and dialed a familiar number. "Carmen Ruiz Law Firm, how may I help you?" "Carmen, it's me, Eleanor Vance," Eleanor said briefly in a calm tone that brooked no argument. "Send the petition to Alex Thorne. Start all the proceedings as quickly as possible." "Understood," the voice on the other end replied. The call ended quickly. Eleanor put her phone away and, without deigning to look at the two petrified figures in the living room, walked straight to the bedroom. The sound of a suitcase opening and drawers closing could be heard. Alex and Lucy looked at each other. Lucy, looking worried, tugged at Alex's sleeve. "Alex, what is she going to do?" "Just putting on a show," and Alex scoffed, regaining his confidence. "What else can she do? She's only threatening. I don't believe she'll actually leave. If she leaves here, where would she go? To a friend's house or back to her hometown. A woman used to living well. As soon as she endures a couple of days of hardship, she'll come back begging." It seemed logical to Lucy. Her gaze toward the bedroom was filled with a flicker of glee and disdain. That's right, a housewife of so many years, without money or power. How long could she maintain that facade of toughness? A little later, Eleanor emerged from the bedroom, dragging a small suitcase. It was a 20-inch carry-on suitcase and seemed very light. She had changed her clothes. She wore simple jeans and a white t-shirt with her long hair pulled back in a ponytail. She didn't look like a woman whose husband had just betrayed her, but a college student preparing for a short trip. She took nothing that belonged to Alex, not the expensive jewelry he had sent her. She only carried what was truly hers. She dragged the suitcase directly toward the door without looking back even once. The sumptuous dinner was still warm on the table, but to her at that moment, it was nothing more than a bitter mockery. When her hand rested on the doorknob, Alex said with an air of superiority, "Think it over carefully. When you get over your tantrum and come to your senses, come back. I'll still give you a chance." Eleanor didn't answer. Only a faint, almost imperceptible smile played on her lips. A chance. He still didn't understand that the one who needed a chance wasn't her. Click. The door closed, separating two worlds. Inside, Alex and Lucy looked at each other and smiled. They believed the drama was over and that they were the winners. Outside, Eleanor entered the elevator with a straight back without the slightest hesitation. When the elevator reached the ground floor, she stepped out of the luxurious apartment building where she had lived for years. The night wind of Manhattan was blowing, bringing a slight chill. She didn't call a taxi or head to the bus stop. She simply stood silently by the sidewalk. Less than a minute later, a black Bentley silently pulled up right in front of her. The rear door opened and a chauffeur in an impeccable uniform stepped out and bowed respectfully. "Miss Eleanor, please get in the car." The chauffeur took the small suitcase from her hand and carefully placed it in the trunk. Eleanor said nothing, just nodded slightly and settled into the luxurious back seat. The car door closed softly, isolating her from the noisy outside world. The car slid silently, blending into the dense traffic. It didn't head toward Midtown or modest residential areas. It turned onto a tree-lined street, heading toward the Upper East Side, the most exclusive and expensive neighborhood of mansions in Manhattan, where every square foot was worth its weight in gold. Finally, the car stopped before the gate of a classic European-style mansion. The elaborate wrought iron gate opened automatically, and the car drove into a courtyard with a meticulously maintained garden. Eleanor stepped out of the car and took a deep breath of the fresh air. This was her real home. The heavy wooden door of the mansion opened. An elderly housekeeper was already waiting for her. "Welcome home, miss," she said with a kind smile. This was not only Eleanor Vance's home, but also her studio, the place where priceless works of art were born, the secret refuge of the name that made the world of fashion and art tremble. Silk Soul. 3 days after Eleanor left, Alex received an envelope from the court. He opened it roughly, glanced at the summons and the official divorce petition sent by the lawyer, and a sneer appeared on his lips. He thought Eleanor was just angry that after a few days of hardship, she would come back on her own. He didn't expect her to take it so seriously as to hire a lawyer. So what? A housewife of so many years without any source of income, how was she going to fight him? At most, he would give her a small alimony as charity and quickly settle the matter. With this superior attitude, Alex called his lawyer, a Mr. Ramos, a divorce specialist. He confidently informed him that he would attend the first meeting to see what tricks his ex-wife would pull out of her sleeve. The Carmen Ruiz law firm was on the 35th floor of a skyscraper in the heart of the financial district on Park Avenue. The gleaming glass and the minimalist but luxurious interior exuded an air of professionalism and exclusivity. Alex and his lawyer walked in. The luxury of the place reinforced his belief that Eleanor had only borrowed money to put up a front. In the meeting room, a woman in her late 30s was already waiting for them. She wore a perfectly tailored gray suit, her hair pulled back in a neat bun, light makeup, but an incredibly sharp gaze. It was Carmen Ruiz, Eleanor Vance's lawyer. Carmen nodded politely. She invited them to sit down without an extra word. Lawyer Ramos took the initiative with a somewhat condescending tone. Ms. Ruiz, we have received Mrs. Vance's petition. My client, Mr. Thorne, is a man who highly values emotional ties. He doesn't want things to get ugly. Regarding the division of assets, we both know that Mrs. Vance has not worked for years, and all her expenses have depended on Mr. Thorne. In consideration of the years of marriage, Mr. Thorne agrees to give her sufficient alimony so she can rent an apartment and find a new job. Carmen Ruiz listened in silence, drumming her long fingers on the table. When Lawyer Ramos finished, she spoke calmly. Mr. Ramos, I believe there is a misunderstanding. My client, Mrs. Vance, is not requesting any compensatory alimony from Mr. Thorne. Ramos and Alex exchanged looks of surprise and mockery. No alimony. Was she planning to walk away empty-handed? Carmen continued in a firm voice. Our demands are very simple. First, immediate divorce based on the evidence of Mr. Thorne's adultery, which is irrefutable. She slid a folder with photos towards them. The photos showed Alex and Lucy in intimate poses in San Francisco. There were even photos of them with little Matthew entering and leaving a luxurious apartment complex. Alex's face changed slightly. He hadn't expected Eleanor to have that. Second, Carmen continued, as for the assets, the apartment on Park Avenue is my client's separate property, acquired before the marriage, so there is nothing to discuss. However, during the marriage, Mr. Thorne's income is considered marital property. We demand an equitable division according to the law. Lawyer Ramos let out a loud laugh. Ms. Ruiz, you must be joking, aren't you? Mr. Thorne's income is indeed marital property, but Mrs. Vance has also lived off that money for years. If it's divided in half, she won't be left with much. Mrs. Vance should be more realistic. Accepting compensatory alimony is more beneficial for her. Alex leaned back in his chair with his arms crossed and an expression of triumph. He watched Carmen with amusement, waiting to see how she would continue with this farce. Carmen didn't flinch. She looked directly at Lawyer Ramos, an almost imperceptible smile playing on her lips. Then, let's talk realistically. She leaned down to open the briefcase beside her and pulled out another dossier, much thicker than the one with the photos. She placed it gently on the table and pushed it toward Alex. Mr. Thorne, you say my client was dependent on you to live, correct? Then please take a look at this. Alex frowned and took the dossier with curiosity. The first page was a bank account statement. His eyes quickly scanned the figures until they reached the final balance. The number wasn't long, but it made his pupils contract instantly. 8 zeros. He quickly turned the page. It was another bank statement, another astronomical figure. He kept flipping through pages. His hands began to tremble. Credit card statements, bond investments, stocks. Each page was a visual blow, but that wasn't all. Beneath them were a series of property deeds, a duplex in Tribeca, a commercial property on Fifth Avenue, even a Miami Beach villa, all in Eleanor Vance's name. Finally, what completely destroyed him was a document about business shares. Eleanor Vance owned 70% of a company called Silk Soul. Silk Soul, the name sounded familiar. He had heard his partner's wives mention it, a high fashion brand specializing in incredibly expensive and hard to get hand embroidered silk products, a symbol of high society. The room fell into absolute silence. Lawyer Ramos, beside him, was also petrified, his mouth agape. Alex felt the blood run cold in his veins. His breathing became labored. He looked up at Carmen with a look of disbelief mixed with confusion, rage, and a deep, invisible fear. The woman he had always despised, the one he thought only knew how to cook and clean, the one he was convinced couldn't live without him, was a magnate in the shadows. The plot twist was so sudden, so brutal, that it caught him completely off guard. While Alex was suffering a psychological earthquake in the law firm's office, Eleanor was in a completely different world. Her classic mansion was not just a place to live. The second and third floors had been transformed into an exquisite design and craftsmanship studio. Here there was no smell of cooking oil, but the subtle aroma of sandalwood and the characteristic scent of the highest quality silks. The morning sun streamed through the large French windows, illuminating shelves stacked with embroidery threads of every color, shimmering like a rainbow. Eleanor no longer wore simple housewife clothes. She was wearing an elegant smoke blue designer silk dress, the soft fabric clinging to her slender but curvy figure. Her long hair was casually pulled up with a wooden pin, revealing her sleek, elegant neck. She didn't wear elaborate makeup, but the aura she emanated was captivating. It was a blend of an artist's classic elegance and a leader's confidence and determination. She was standing before a large embroidery hoop, her hands moving deftly, guiding the needle over a background of black silk. Beneath her fingers, a fire phoenix was taking shape. Every feather looked incredibly real, radiating a golden glow. Her concentration made everything around her seem to stop. A young woman, her assistant named Anna, tiptoed in with a tablet in her hand. Eleanor, excuse me for interrupting, but a very important collaboration proposal just came in. Anna didn't dare call her director or boss. Everyone here respectfully called her Eleanor, a familiar yet appropriately reverent address. Eleanor stopped her hand, but her eyes didn't leave the work. From whom? From the Montoya Group, one of the leading luxury real estate investment and art conglomerates. They say their president, Mr. Ricardo Montoya, greatly admires Silk Soul's works. Eleanor had heard of the Montoya Group. They were a major force in the New York business world, known for their projects with a strong artistic component and extremely high aesthetic standards. Anna continued her report. They are about to inaugurate a new art and shopping center called the Crystal View. They hope to personally invite the founder of Silk Soul to collaborate on the design of an exclusive silk embroidery art exhibition space in the main lobby. They say it will be the centerpiece of the entire project. It was an invitation of enormous weight. The Crystal View was anticipated to become a new Manhattan landmark. If Silk Soul's works were exhibited in such a central location, the brand's fame would skyrocket. Eleanor pondered for a moment. For the past 3 years, to dedicate time to her small family, she had rejected many large projects, accepting only private commissions to keep the studio running. She had hidden behind the name Silk Soul for so long that she had almost forgotten the great ambitions she once held. Now she was free, without burdens or ties. Perhaps it was time for Silk Soul to truly shine. She turned to Anna, her gaze calm but firm. Tell them we accept to meet. Schedule an appointment for me with their president, Mr. Montoya. Anna nodded happily and immediately withdrew to carry out the order. Eleanor returned to the embroidery hoop, her fingers gently stroking the splendid feathers of the phoenix. The phoenix rises from its ashes. Perhaps that was also her destiny. The shipwreck of her marriage had not destroyed her. It had only made her stronger and more radiant. Her gaze turned toward the window, toward the Manhattan skyscrapers. Her future and that of Silk Soul began here and now. After Eleanor's departure, Lucy Miller finally entered the apartment as the new lady of the house. She spent the first day touring every room, meticulously erasing any trace of the other woman. She threw out the pale blue sheet set that Eleanor loved and replaced it with an intense, provocative red one. The small, delicate potted plants on the balcony were replaced by ostentatious bouquets of roses. She even bought a series of expensive abstract paintings to hang on the walls, attempting to impose a completely different style, a style that belonged to Lucy Miller. Each change was carefully photographed and posted on her Instagram profile using phrases full of innuendo. Next to a photo of a romantic candlelight dinner, she wrote, "Happiness sometimes takes time to arrive, but if it's with the right person, the wait is worth it." Below a photo of little Matthew playing on the new sofa, she added, "Finally, my son has a complete home. Where there is love, there is home." Each post was like an invisible needle, calculated to wound Eleanor's heart. Lucy imagined Eleanor in some corner, perhaps in a shabby rented apartment, looking at those images with a heart broken by pain and jealousy. She hoped for a reaction, an insult, or at least a sign that her opponent was suffering, but she was disappointed. Eleanor Vance's profile was completely silent. Her profile picture was still that of a white magnolia. Her last post was half a year ago. She seemed to have evaporated from the virtual world, completely ignoring Lucy's provocations. This silence made Lucy feel as if she were hit in a useless, frustrating cotton sack. She didn't understand how Eleanor could be sat so calm. Meanwhile, in the old university classmates' WhatsApp group, their story had become the hottest topic of conversation. A friend with the nickname Lazy Cat was the first to speak. "Guys, have you heard? Alex brought his mistress and a son home. Eleanor left. Poor Eleanor, so many years sacrificing herself for him just to end up like this." Another, probably Alex's friend, spoke up in his defense. "Matters of the heart are complicated. Alex was alone in San Francisco working hard for 3 years. It's normal for a man away from his wife to have a moment of weakness," as someone immediately retorted. "A moment of weakness that produces a 2-year-old child? What does he think Eleanor is?" The discussion heated up. Some felt sorry for Eleanor. Others insinuated that she didn't know how to keep her husband. "A woman who is too good and only dedicates herself to the house is destined to be abandoned. In what century is she living, dependent on a man? Look at her now. She must be having a terrible time." Lucy read every comment. She felt satisfied when they spoke ill of Eleanor, but she got angry because many still took her side. Eleanor's presence, though absent, remained a shadow looming over her life. She turned to Alex, who was sitting on the sofa with a frown, and said in a sugary voice, "Honey, why don't you call her and talk to her? Her silence worries me." But Alex, who had just returned from the law firm, was in a terrible mood. He roughly pulled his hand away. "Worried about what? She's just pretending to be a martyr. Stop worrying about her." Seeing Alex's unusually hostile attitude, Lucy didn't dare say more. She had to swallow her frustration. She didn't know that in Alex's mind, her existence and that of the child were no longer important. His mind was completely absorbed by Eleanor Vance's immense and secret fortune. To Lucy, Eleanor's silence was contempt. She didn't realize that it was the most powerful weapon, because when someone stops caring about you, all provocations become useless. Alex left the Park Avenue building in a state of total confusion. The figures on the statements, the addresses of the luxury properties, and the 2 words Silk Soul danced ceaselessly in his head, creating an inescapable chaos. Upon arriving at the apartment, he locked himself in his office, ignoring the knocks of a worried Lucy at the door. His first reaction was not remorse, but blind fury. Deception. It's all a deception, he thought, hitting the table. Eleanor Vance, the docile, simple wife he thought he had under control, had dared to deceive him, building an empire behind his back for years. He felt like a clown, an idiot who had been manipulated without realizing it. His pride was shattered. Tell me whether you have parents, grandparents, or older family members who deserve more respect than they currently receive from their families. Alternatively, tell me if you yourself are going through a situation in which you're not appreciated as much as you truly deserve. But after the anger came an indescribable confusion. How did she do it? Where did she get the money? Silk Soul, why had she never mentioned it? He began his own frantic investigation. He didn't dare ask his rich partners or friends, he was too embarrassed. Admitting that his wife, whom he always boasted of supporting, was infinitely richer than him was an unacceptable humiliation. He resorted to older methods. He opened his address book and looked up the numbers of the old university classmates he hadn't spoken to in years. Using the excuse of organizing an alumni reunion, he began to ask questions. The first call was to the old class representative. After the customary greetings, he casually mentioned, "Hey, are you still in touch with Eleanor Vance? I haven't heard from her lately." "Eleanor," the other person hesitated. "But you two got married, didn't you? The last time I saw her was at the reunion 5 years ago. She was still as beautiful as ever, though quieter. By the way, now that I think about it, you stole the goddess of the whole faculty." Alex frowned. "Goddess? Don't you remember?" The representative laughed. "Who was Eleanor Vance back then, the greatest talent in the fashion design department? Her final project won the national award and was exhibited at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. Major firms were fighting to hire her, offering her a salary that we, fresh graduates, couldn't even dream of." Every word from his old friend was a hammer blow to Alex's head. He remembered it, but they were blurry memories. He remembered that she drew very well, but he had never paid attention to the awards or job offers. Back then, he was only drunk on love and swollen with pride for having such a beautiful and talented girlfriend. "We all thought she would become a great designer, perhaps internationally famous," the friend continued. "And suddenly, after you two started dating, she rejected everything. She said she wanted to stay home to support you. We all felt terrible pity. Love really blinds people." When he hung up, Alex was petrified in his chair. For the first time in many years, a feeling of guilt crept into his heart. Now he remembered. He remembered the sparkle in her eyes when she talked about her design dreams. He remembered her confidence when she received the award. He had promised to support her, but his own selfishness and ambitions had gradually buried her talent and aspirations. He had turned a radiant phoenix into a common sparrow within a golden cage he himself had created. But that feeling of guilt lasted only a few seconds. It was quickly overshadowed by a stronger, darker emotion, greed and envy. If she was so talented, it was understandable that she had earned that fortune herself. But why had she hidden it from him? A malicious thought formed in his head. She earned that fortune during their marriage. No matter how she did it legally, it was marital property. She had withheld information from him, she had deceived him. She was the one at fault. Alex's mentality completely changed. He was no longer an unfaithful husband who wanted a quick divorce to be with his new partner. Now he was a hungry beast, stalking a succulent prey. Lucy and his son faded into the background. His sole objective now was to get a share, or even the entirety, of Eleanor Vance's secret empire. A month later, the Plaza Hotel in New York shone under the nightlights. Luxury cars paraded past the main entrance. The press, major fashion bloggers, and numerous influential figures from the city's business and art worlds had gathered there. All attention was focused on a single event, the presentation of the new Silk Soul collection in collaboration with the Crystal View Art Center project by the Montoya Group. Until now, Silk Soul had always been a name shrouded in mystery. Its products never needed mass advertising. Its fame spread by word of mouth among the elite like a treasure. All that was known was that its founder was a master of silk embroidery, but no one knew her face or true identity. The fact that Silk Soul decided for the first time to collaborate with a large group and organize a public presentation had caused an earthquake in the sector. In the old apartment, Alex was sitting on the sofa with a somber face. Lucy was trying to calm little Matthew, who wouldn't stop crying. The atmosphere in the house was tense. The divorce was not proceeding as quickly as Alex had imagined. Eleanor's lawyer, Carmen Ruiz, was relentless, presenting evidence and arguments that left his side completely on the defensive. The investigation into Eleanor's assets had also reached a dead end. Everything was perfectly shielded. Frustrated, he turned on the television and started changing channels. Suddenly, he stopped at a finance channel that was broadcasting a fashion event live. The headline on the screen caught his attention: Presentation of the Phoenix Rises collection by Silk Soul and the Montoya Group. Silk Soul. Those two words were like a needle pricking his most sensitive nerve. He stared intently at the screen. The stage was exquisite, the lighting magical. Models paraded in dazzling outfits, adorned with incredibly detailed hand embroidery, especially the image of a fire phoenix that seemed to blaze on the black silk. He realized that it was not just clothing, it was artwork. The fashion show ended with thunderous applause. The presenter walked onto the stage, his voice full of excitement. And now, ladies and gentlemen, the most anticipated moment of the evening. Let's welcome the founder, the soul of the Silk Soul brand, appearing for the first time before the public. All the cameras turned toward the side of the stage, the lights focused on one spot. Alex's heart began to beat strangely. He too was curious. Who was really behind that mysterious name? From the darkness emerged a slender figure. When the lights illuminated her, the entire room gasped. The woman wore an ethereal silver-white silk dress with a magnolia branch embroidered with exquisite shimmer and silk thread. Her hair was pulled up in a high bun, revealing a delicate, serene face that nonetheless emanated an extraordinary aura. She didn't smile radiantly, she just nodded slightly to the audience, but her eyes shone with confidence and pride. Alex was petrified. The glass he was holding fell from his hands and shattered on the floor. The sharp sound couldn't snap him out of his state of shock. Lucy spun around, startled, and before she could scold him, she too was speechless as she saw the image on the television. The woman who was at the peak of fame, receiving admiring applause, the one hailed as a design genius, was Eleanor Vance. She was not the simple, weak wife they had always despised. She was Silk Soul. At that moment, an elegant, handsome man walked onto the stage. He wore a perfectly tailored suit with an air of nobility and assurance. It was Ricardo Montoya, the president of the Montoya Group. He stood beside Eleanor, giving her a look full of respect and admiration. They stood side by side, a talented artist and a business magnate. They seemed strangely compatible. That image, viewed through the television screen, was like the sharpest blade, tearing apart the last vestige of pride Alex had left. The next morning, Alex drove to the mansion where Eleanor lived. This time, his face showed neither anger nor contempt, but a haggard look. His eyes were bloodshot from lack of sleep. He had prepared a new script. He rang the doorbell. The housekeeper opened the door and looked at him coldly. "I'm sorry, Miss Eleanor is not home." "Please, ma'am," Alex said in a pleading voice. "Just tell Eleanor that I know I was wrong. I've come to beg her forgiveness. I'll wait here until she receives me." And he actually stood in front of the gate under the morning sun, which was starting to warm up. He believed that Eleanor, no matter how tough she was, couldn't be so cruel as to leave her former husband out in the cold. He underestimated Eleanor. Almost an hour later, the heavy iron gate opened. But it wasn't Eleanor who came out to greet him, but the housekeeper with a glass of water. She left the glass on a pillar of the gate. "Miss Eleanor says that if Mr. Thorne wants to wait, he should wait, but not to pass out from sunstroke in front of her house, as it would bother others." Having said that, she turned and closed the gate. Alex went purple with rage. That humiliation was worse than insults, but he restrained himself. He knew he couldn't use force, only cunning. Finally, at noon, Eleanor agreed to receive him in the living room. She sat on a single sofa with a cup of chamomile tea in her hand, as calm as if she were receiving an unexpected guest. As soon as Alex saw her, his eyes reddened. He quickly approached with the intention of sitting next to her, but her cold gaze stopped him. He had to sit on the sofa opposite. He began his performance, his voice full of remorse and pain. "Eleanor, I'm sorry. I've been thinking a lot lately. I know I'm a scoundrel who failed you. It was all because that slut, Lucy Miller, put a spell on me. Eleanor, after all, we have years of marriage behind us. Could you give me a chance to mend my mistakes?" Eleanor sipped some tea without saying anything, observing his performance in silence. Seeing that she didn't react, Alex changed the subject. "I watched the presentation last night. You're incredible, Eleanor. I had no idea you were Silk Soul. You must have worked very hard. You hid it from me, too. If I'd known how talented and hardworking you were, I never would have treated you this way." He started twisting the truth. "Your assets, your brand, it was all built while we were married, right? According to the law, that's considered marital property. Eleanor, let's not divorce, okay? For old time's sake, withdraw the petition. From now on, I'll be by your side. I'll help you manage the company, grow your career. Together, we'll build our own empire." Finally, his true colors were revealed. It wasn't remorse, it wasn't love. It was bottomless greed for her immense fortune. Eleanor gently placed the cup on the table. The slat sound made Alex jump. He looked up, and for the first time since he had entered, she looked him straight in the eyes. Her gaze was clear, yet so sharp it seemed to see through his soul. Alex, are you done? She said slowly, articulating every word. She stood up, went to her desk, and pulled out a dossier. First, the Silk Soul brand was registered, and the company founded by me before we got married. It is all my separate property. Second, during the marriage, all the company's income was channeled into a separate account managed by an independent trust. My lawyer has all the documents proving the origin and separation of those funds. It has nothing to do with your supposed marital property. Third, the divorce petition, I will never withdraw it. Each of her sentences was a devastating blow to Alex's plan. He hadn't expected her to be so prepared, so meticulous, leaving him no loophole to exploit. Eleanor walked toward the door and signaled to the housekeeper, "Escort Mr. Thorne out and ensure this person is never allowed back here starting now." Alex remained petrified in the middle of the living room, watching Eleanor's cold back. The brazenness on his face finally turned into real panic and despair. He realized he had completely lost the game. A few days after the meeting with Ricardo Montoya, as Eleanor Vance was focused on the sketches for the Crystal View project, the housekeeper walked in with a somewhat awkward expression. "Miss Eleanor, Mrs. Thorne, Mr. Alex Thorne's mother, is at the gate and says she wants to see you." Eleanor paused for an instant, but the stroke of her pencil didn't tremble. She had anticipated this day would come. Knowing her former mother-in-law's character, and after her identity as Silk Soul came to light, it was impossible for her to sit idly by. She put down the pencil. "Let her in," she said calmly. The housekeeper was a little surprised, but obeyed. Eleanor wanted to settle all matters once and for all. Mrs. Thorne was led into the living room. In total contrast to her arrogant and overbearing attitude on the phone the other day, today she looked utterly defeated. Her gray hair disheveled, her eyes swollen, her clothes wrinkled. As soon as she saw Eleanor, she rushed toward her with teary eyes. "Eleanor, my dear!" She tried to grab her hand, but Eleanor deftly stepped back to evade her. Mrs. Thorne was left with her hand in the air, awkward, and quickly wiped away her tears to begin her melodrama. "My daughter, I was wrong. I'm old now, and I can't distinguish right from wrong. I haven't been able to eat or sleep these days. Remorse is consuming me. I've come to beg your forgiveness." Eleanor sat silently on a sofa, indicating for her to sit in the armchair opposite, maintaining a safe distance. She said nothing, waiting to see how far her performance would go. Seeing that Eleanor didn't react, Mrs. Thorne intensified her drama. She started blaming everything on Lucy Miller. "It's all that slut's fault. She seduced my Alex. My son has always been a good boy who loved his wife. It was that shrew who trapped him using the child to tie him down. That's why he made that mistake with you. Daughter, you are the best wife the Thorne family could have. Beautiful, good, and so talented. I failed you. My son failed you." She wept bitterly and then moved on to pleading. "Eleanor, for this old woman, for the years of marriage, forgive him this once. What man doesn't make mistakes? If you come back, I promise I'll throw that woman and her child out of the house immediately. I'll make Alex kneel to beg your forgiveness." To add more force to her words, she didn't hesitate to disparage the child she previously called her grandson. "I never wanted that bastard. Who knows if he's Alex's son or anyone else's? I will never accept him as a Thorne family grandson. Our only daughter-in-law is you." Hearing this, Eleanor's calm finally was wavered, but not out of compassion, but out of a deep disgust. The brazenness and hypocrisy of that woman surpassed her imagination. She looked up, staring directly into Mrs. Thorne's eyes, which were full of false tears. "Mrs. Thorne, are you done with your performance?" she said in a cold, distant voice. The word Mrs. made Mrs. Thorne's smile freeze. That address marked an insurmountable barrier. Eleanor continued without emotion. "Before, it was you who called me to say I should be understanding of your son and your grandson for the good of everyone. Now you sit here insulting them, calling them a slut and a battered. Don't you think your words are contradictory and ridiculous?" Mrs. Thorne's face paled, unable to articulate a word. Eleanor stood up. Her gaze was completely glacial. My relationship with Alex Thorne is over. I will never withdraw the divorce petition, and I have no interest in returning to your calculating family. I ask you, from now on, not to bother me again." She turned to the housekeeper. "Mrs. Carmen, please escort the guest out." Mrs. Thorne was stunned, unable to believe she was being thrown out in such a humiliating manner. She tried to protest, but seeing Eleanor's determined and cold gaze, the words stuck in her throat. She understood that there was no turning back. The housekeeper approached, courteous but firm. "Mrs. Thorne, please, this way." Mrs. Thorne stood up, staggering, and was led toward the door, humiliated. The mansion door slammed shut behind her, like a final period to all her vain hopes. From the day he was expelled from Eleanor's mansion, Alex Thorne became another person. He had lost the air of confidence and arrogance of the successful architect and no longer felt like playing the role of the loving husband or model father. He spent most of his time locked in his office, surrounded by stacks of messy documents. But they weren't architectural blueprints, but information he had gathered about the Silk Soul brand, about Eleanor's real estate properties, about the lawyer Carmen Roos. The more he investigated, the more desperate he felt. Everything was built like an impregnable, seamless fortress. Impotence turned into irritability, and he began to lash out at everything around him. Little Matthew's crying annoyed him. The food Lucy cooked disgusted him. The apartment, once the symbol of his success, now felt like a suffocating cage. Lucy, of course, noticed the change. Alex's tenderness and pampering had disappeared, replaced by harsh words and a cold attitude. She felt insecure. Her dream of becoming a Mrs. Thorne, the owner of a wealthy family, seemed increasingly distant. She knew she had to do something to consolidate her position. That night, after putting Matthew to bed, Lucy put on a seductive silk nightgown, poured a glass of red wine, and walked into the office. "Honey, don't work so late. It's bad for you." Alex didn't look up, only grunted. Lucy left the glass on the desk, wrapped her arms around his neck from behind, and whispered, "Look, the divorce with her is almost done. How about we go look at wedding venues this weekend? My father also asked. He says he wants to throw me a big wedding." The word wedding was like a match in the powder keg about to explode inside Alex. He roughly pushed her hands away and jumped up, his eyes bloodshot. "Wedding? Are you crazy? How can you think about weddings at a time like this?" Lucy backed away, startled with an offended look. "And why not? My son and I also need official recognition, don't we? Or do you intend for us to always live without legal status?" Alex let out a bitter, sarcastic laugh. "Status? You only think about status. Do you know what we've lost? A whole fortune, a life we could have enjoyed forever. And it's all your fault. If it weren't for you and this child, things wouldn't have reached this point." Lucy was stunned. Tears welled up in her eyes. "My fault? Alex, how can you say that? In San Francisco, who swore eternal love to me? Who said he was fed up with his simple wife? And now you're blaming everything on me?" The argument erupted. For the first time, all their frustrations, calculations, and selfishness were thrown in each other's faces. "If I had known how rich she was, I would be crazy to have left her for you," Alex roared. "Do you think I don't know what you're thinking?" she screamed. "You regret not clinging to that gold mine. You despise me because I don't give you the same benefits as her. Alex Thorne, you're nothing but a gold digger." Smash! Alex swept the wineglass off the table. It shattered on the floor, and the red wine splattered on the beige carpet like bloodstains. The atmosphere in the room turned icy. They looked at each other with hostility like two strangers. The relationship built on betrayal and calculation finally showed its first deep, irreparable crack. They were no longer allies on the same side, but two selfish people trying to save their own interests on a sinking ship. While the outside world was in chaos, Eleanor Vance didn't care at all. After getting rid of the bothersome people, she dedicated all her mind and energy to work. The Crystal View project demanded enormous creativity and investment, but that only excited her more. However, in addition to this commercial project, Eleanor had always harbored another plan, one that stemmed from her love for the art of embroidery. In a meeting with the Silk Soul management team, she officially announced the new project. The large screen in the meeting room showed images of an old town next to a river with moss-covered roofs and white walls stained by time. It looked peaceful, but also conveyed a sense of abandonment. This is the Silk Village of New Harmony on the outskirts of Indianapolis, Eleanor said in a clear, passionate voice. It was once one of the country's most famous centers for silk production and hand embroidery, but with industrialization, the craft has been disappearing. Now, only a few elderly artisans remain, clinging to their art, living with great difficulty. She paused, looking at everyone in the room. Silk Soul exists today, thanks to the essence of traditional embroidery art. We cannot just receive without giving anything back. That is why I have decided that the company will invest all this year's profits to launch the Phoenix Rises project. Everyone in the room listened in silence. We are going to restore the Silk Village of New Harmony. We will repair the workshops, modernize the equipment, invite the master artisans to teach, and open free training class for the new generations. We will turn this place not only into a production center, but also into a center for cultural preservation and experience tourism. We will return the art of silk embroidery to its golden age. Eleanor's plan was not a business move, but a deep desire. She wanted to use her own strength to protect the cultural values that were being lost. Immediately afterward, information about the project spread in the media. With the fame of Silk Soul, the Phoenix Rises project received strong support from the public and the local government. Everyone praised the initiative as a significant act that demonstrated the social responsibility of a major company. The image of Silk Soul and Eleanor Vance was further enhanced in the public eye. Eleanor had no idea that this heartfelt move would unintentionally become a deadly blow to the plans of Alex and Lucy's family. At that moment, in the offices of a construction company, Lucy's father pounded the table in fury. That woman, Eleanor Vance! Alex stood before him, pale-faced. In front of them was the business newspaper with the news of the Silk Soul project on the cover. Do you know where that Silk Village is? Lucy's father hissed. Right next to the land that cost us so much to prepare for expropriation to build our tourist resort. Now the government has approved her cultural preservation project, considering it protected heritage. Our expropriation plan has gone down the drain. All the initial investment is at risk of being lost. A shiver ran down Alex's spine. That tourist resort was a massive project, his opportunity to relaunch his career after recent failures. He had put all his energy and contacts into it. Lucy, who was also there, stammered, Dad, maybe it's just a coincidence. Coincidence? Her father laughed bitterly. How naive you are. In this world, there are no such coincidences. That woman is clearly after us. She wants to cut off all our escape routes. Alex clenched his fists so tightly that the veins stood out on the back of his hands. He didn't believe it was a coincidence. He believed it was a perfectly calculated revenge on Eleanor's part. She not only wanted the divorce and to keep her assets, she wanted to completely destroy his career and his future. Fear and hatred intertwined, turning into a toxic paranoia. He looked at Lucy with suspicion. Did she know about this project beforehand? I don't know, Lucy stammered. She played a very dirty card, Alex roared. We are completely at her mercy. Eleanor, in her design studio, meticulously sketched the first details for the future Silk Village. She had no idea that an act born of her heart had unintentionally pushed those who betrayed her to the brink of the abyss. That move, without any calculation, was the most masterful of all. When it rains, it pours. This phrase had never been truer for Alex than at that moment. While he and Lucy's family were still searching for a way out for their stalled tourist project, another bomb exploded, annihilating their last hopes. The Barcelona International Business Center project, the architectural work that had been his greatest pride, the ticket that had catapulted him to the top, was embroiled in a major scandal. It all began with an anonymous post on an architecture forum, accompanied by detailed images and video analysis. The post announced that the newly completed building was already showing serious cracks in the structure of the beams and foundations. The author, who identified himself as a civil engineer with a conscience, pointed out that the materials used, especially the steel and cement, had technical specifications far inferior to the standard design. In short, a complete embezzlement. The news, which at first circulated only in professional circles, quickly turned into a media storm thanks to social media. Major newspapers picked up the story. The image of the gleaming skyscraper, the pride of San Francisco, was now associated with terrifying words: poor quality, tofu building, time bomb. The developer and Lucy's father's construction company were immediately investigated by the authorities, and the entire project was halted. As the chief architect, primarily responsible for the design and supervision of the work, Alex became the target of all criticism. The reputation he had worked so hard to build collapsed in one night. His phone wouldn't stop ringing, calls from journalists, from partners canceling contracts, from clients who had bought spaces in the building demanding compensation. He sat in his office, his eyes lost, staring at the sensationalist headlines on the computer screen. Impossible, impossible, he murmured. I put so much effort into that design. I spent so many nights on the site. How could something like this have happened? At that moment, Lucy's father called. His voice on the other end sounded like the roar of a wounded beast. Alex, you wretch, what kind of design did you do for this to happen? You've ruined us. Alex, as if waking up, shouted back, It's not my fault. My design has no problem. It's your company's fault. I'm sure they switched the materials to steal money. Don't give me that nonsense, the other man laughed bitterly. Everything was done according to your plans. You're the chief architect. You are responsible. The alliance built on self-interest had completely broken. They frantically blamed each other, trying to climb out of the mud. When he hung up, Alex was trembling and gasping for breath. He felt cornered, surrounded by an inescapable darkness. Amidst the panic and despair, his mind clung to a single name. Eleanor Vance. It had to be her. A toxic paranoia gripped him. The timing was too convenient. First, the tourist resort, now the San Francisco building. Everything related to him was crumbling. It couldn't be a coincidence. She must have hired someone to investigate, find his weaknesses, and leak the information to sink him. She wanted revenge. She not only wanted the divorce, she wanted it to destroy everything he had, and drag him into the mud so he could never get up. That thought, like a poisonous snake, coiled in his heart. He no longer saw Eleanor as a pitiful ex-wife, but as a dangerous enemy, a woman with a twisted and terrifying mind, pulling the strings from the shadows. His face contorted, distorted by hatred and absolute fear. Alex's world was engulfed in the storm, but Eleanor's life was surprisingly calm. She dedicated most of her time to her design studio or visited libraries and museums in search of material and inspiration for the Crystal View project. That afternoon, she went to the International Hospital of New York. It was not a place she liked to go, but she couldn't avoid it. Mr. Solar, an elderly master of silk embroidery and her first mentor, was admitted there after suffering a mild stroke. After visiting him in his room, chatting with him, and ensuring he was resting, Eleanor left. On her way to the elevator, she passed the pediatric wing. Her intention was to walk straight past, but the inconsolable crying of a child unconsciously stopped her steps. In the waiting room, in front of an examination room, a familiar figure caught her attention. It was Lucy Miller. She no longer had the dazzling, haughty appearance of their first meeting. She wore simple, somewhat worn clothes, and her hair was messy. Her face, devoid of makeup, looked pale and exhausted. In her arms, she held little Matthew. The boy was crying loudly, his face flushed with a high fever. Lucy looked completely lost and distressed, rocking the child, while ceaselessly looking at the consultation room door. Eleanor stood in a discreet corner, observing. A complex, hard-to-describe feeling invaded her. She felt neither glee nor joy at seeing her rival's situation. Seeing Lucy struggling with her sick son, she no longer saw the image of the hateful mistress, but that of a helpless, worried mother. And that child was completely innocent. His crying had no falsehood or calculation. It was simply the pain of a small body. He didn't deserve to suffer the consequences of adult mistakes. A pang of bitterness shot through her. She was not a saint. She couldn't forgive what they had done to her. But at that moment, seeing the child crying in pain, she couldn't feel hatred. It was a pure compassion that transcended any personal grudge. She had no intention of approaching. She stood watching from a distance and then turned to leave. Those matters no longer concerned her. Just as she turned, she bumped into someone. "Excuse me," she said quickly, looking up. The person in front of her surprised her a little. It was Ricardo Montoya. He also seemed surprised, but quickly smiled courteously. Miss Vance, what a coincidence. Eleanor nodded slightly. Hello, Mr. Montoya. I came to visit a friend of my father's, he explained briefly. Then his perceptive gaze fell on her face. You seem well. You don't look good. He didn't look toward where Lucy was, the dad's. His attention was focused on her. That delicacy made Eleanor feel comfortable. She shook her head, trying to force a smile. It's nothing, just an old memory. Ricardo didn't ask further. He knew where to stop. He just looked at her deeply and suddenly said something seemingly irrelevant. Art needs inspiration. Don't let bad memories cloud it. His words were not empty comfort. They were like a soulmate's reminder, someone who truly understood her inner world. He didn't see her as a woman embroiled in a divorce, but as an artist whose creative space needed to be protected. A warm current ran through Eleanor's heart. It had been a long time since she felt so understood. Thank you, she said. This time her smile was much more sincere. She said goodbye to him and headed to the elevator. The image of the crying child and the exhausted mother still haunted her. But Ricardo's words were like a cool breeze, gently dissipating the dark clouds and helping her find inner peace. Her path was art, creation. The old matters had to be left behind. The San Francisco scandal and the stalling of the tourist project had put Alex in a dire situation. However, he still harbored one last hope. In the divorce, he would try to prove that part of Eleanor's assets had been formed during the marriage to obtain some capital and start over. He didn't know that a real tsunami was quietly forming where he least expected it, about to sweep everything away. In the offices of Carmen Ruiz's law firm, the atmosphere was one of maximum tension. Her team included not only excellent lawyers, but also the best experts in financial investigation and forensic accounting. Initially, their goal was simply to gather evidence of the infidelity and clearly define Eleanor's assets to protect her interests in the divorce. But by further investigating Alex's income for the division of marital property, an expert on the team discovered an anomaly. The young financial analyst pointed to a complex money flow diagram on the large screen. Carmen, look at this. This is the official salary and bonuses Alex Thorne received for the San Francisco project. The figure is high, but reasonable. However, when tracing transactions related to Lucy's father's construction company, we found unusual expenses. He zoomed in on a series of transactions. A huge amount of capital from the project had been transferred to several construction material supplier companies. The suspicious thing was that these companies had been created just before the project began. They had no history of activity, and their tax addresses were vague. Carmen narrowed her eyes. Her professional instinct immediately told her something was wrong. Continue, the expert nodded. After receiving the money, these phantom companies transferred almost the entire amount, after deducting a small portion, to dozens of different personal accounts through multiple small transactions to avoid attracting attention. It took us a long time to track this money. He paused, took a deep breath, and pointed to a name on the screen. And finally, a considerable portion of that money ended up in an offshore account. The holder of that account is Alex Thorne. The entire room fell silent. Everyone understood the gravity of the matter. It was no longer a simple civil divorce case. It was a case of organized economic crime, embezzlement, misappropriation of funds, money laundering. Any of these crimes was enough for Alex and Lucy's father to end up in jail. Now everything clicked into place. Alex's meteoric career, his life of luxury in San Francisco, did not come solely from his talent as an architect. They had been built with illegal money. He was not just an unfaithful husband, he was a criminal. Carmen immediately called Eleanor, not giving her the news over the phone, but requesting an in-person meeting. In the luxurious living room of the mansion, Eleanor silently read the documents Carmen handed her. The more she read, the colder her face became. She knew Alex was ambitious, pragmatic, willing to do anything to climb the ladder, but she never imagined he could lose all decency, trampling on ethics, his profession, and the law in this way. This betrayal was more painful than his infidelity. It not only stained their love, but completely negated the integrity of the person she had once blindly trusted. Eleanor, Carmen said seriously, with this evidence, we not only win the divorce, but we can file a criminal complaint directly. The decision is yours. Eleanor was silent for a long time. Her gaze lost out the window where the last rays of sun were fading. She was not a person who liked to corner others, but this time the matter was no longer a personal grudge. It affected the safety of an entire building, justice, and the law. She turned to Carmen, her gaze now firm. Carmen, do what the law requires. He who makes a mistake must assume responsibility. It was the final card, the knockout blow that would end everything for Alex Thorne. Alex received a new letter from Carmen Ruiz law firm. This time, it wasn't a summons or a proposal for asset division. It was a formal warning referring to irregular financial transactions related to the San Francisco project, accompanied by a blurred copy of some transfer orders to the offshore account in his name. The letter did not explicitly threaten a complaint, but the intimidation was unmistakable. The moment he saw those figures, Alex felt the world crumble. A cold sweat ran down his back. His hands trembled uncontrollably. It's over, he thought. Eleanor knows everything. She doesn't just want the money. She wants to put me in jail. Absolute panic overruled his reason. He ran out of his office like a maniac, looking for Lucy. He found her in the living room, feeding little Matthew yogurt. Alex threw the paper onto the table. The noise scared the child, who burst into tears. "What is this? Explain it to me." Lucy, startled, calmed the child and picked up the paper. As soon as she saw the familiar figures, her face turned pale. I don't know anything," she stammered, avoiding his gaze. Alex lost patience. He grabbed her by the shoulders and shook her, almost shouting, "Don't pretend anymore. How long are you going to deceive me? Eleanor knows everything. She has all the evidence. She's going to report us. We're going to jail. Do you understand?" The word jail was like a dagger in Lucy's greatest fears. Her mask of fragility and victimhood finally shattered. She burst into tears, but this time it wasn't an act. It was pure terror. She collapsed, trembling, and confessed, "It was my father's idea. He said the project needed liquidity, that it was only a temporary loan, that we would pay it back later." Alex let out a demented laugh. "A loan? Using phantom companies to transfer money offshore is a loan? And why to my account?" Because you're the chief architect," Lucy sobbed. "Using your account would justify some expenses. My father said it would be safer. I only did it for our sake." She lifted her tear-drenched face, trying to appeal to his love. "I wanted us to have a solid future, to give Matthew the best life. I considered that money ours, the family's. When we get married, my money will also be yours, right?" Instead of comforting him, her words were like a bucket of cold water. He released her, stepping back, looking at her as if for the first time. In an instant, all the loose pieces clicked into place in his head, forming a complete and terrifying picture. Her appearance in San Francisco, her perfect understanding and tenderness, her unconditional love, it had all been a meticulously calculated farce. He was not the lover she adored. He was just a tool, a valuable pawn. His title as chief architect, his signature, and his bank account were what she and her father truly needed. The love he had idealized, the excuse for his own betrayal, turned out to be a deception from the start. Alex felt a sharp pain in his chest. He couldn't breathe. He had given up a woman who truly loved him, a peaceful life for an illusion created by himself and by these scammers. He collapsed onto the sofa, his eyes empty. He had lost everything: career, reputation, love, and soon probably his freedom. The drama in which he was one of the main actors had finally reached its end, and he was the one who would pay the highest price. The apartment was plunged into a terrifying silence after the argument. Little Matthew's crying had stopped. Lucy was cradling him in the bedroom, and her sobs could be heard occasionally. Alex remained motionless on the sofa, his gaze lost on the now dry red wine stain on the carpet. He felt like a ship slowly sinking into the depths of the ocean, surrounded only by cold darkness. Career, reputation, money, everything was slipping through his hands. And now, even the supposed love and the new family he had used to justify his betrayal had revealed themselves as a blatant fraud. He was only a pawn, a tool. Lucy came out of the bedroom. Her eyes were swollen, but she had managed to calm down. She knew it was not the time for confrontation. The only way to keep that man was to show vulnerability, use her last weapon. She sat down next to him, her voice weak and soft. Honey, I'm sorry. I was very angry before and said things I didn't mean. Don't hold it against me. Now is not the time to argue. We have to find a solution together, right? Alex didn't reply. Lucy continued, placing her hand on his, which was icy cold. No matter what happens, we still have Matthew. Our son is small. He needs both of us. For him, let's get through this together, okay? The word son made Alex's eyelids tremble. He slowly turned to look at the woman beside him. Her face was still beautiful, but to him, it now only reflected a repulsive falsehood. Every word she spoke had a purpose. He pulled his hand away. His voice was hoarse and cold. Do you really want me, or do you just want my chief architect position? Lucy froze with an offended look. What are you saying? Of course I want you. Alex let out a bitter laugh, a smile sadder than crying. Me, or what I could offer you and your father? The contempt in his gaze broke the last limit of Lucy's patience. She couldn't pretend anymore. Fear and anger erupted, turning into poisonous, unfiltered words. So what if I want you? And so what if I don't? Alex Thorne, look at you. What do you have left now? Your career is over, you have no money, and you're about to go to jail. Do you think you still deserve to be wanted? The argument flared up again, this time with more ferocity. They hurled the cruelest words at each other. If I had known, I would never have teamed up with a woman like you. Alex roared. You regret it, don't you? She screamed, her face contorted with rage. Do you think I had a good time having to serve a guy like you and also having to give you a son? You should feel lucky to have Matthew and me. In the climax of her fury, Lucy blurted out a sentence she would regret for the rest of her life. A seemingly casual phrase, but one that was the fatal blow to Alex's last vulnerable point. She laughed bitterly, her tone full of sarcasm. If it weren't for this child, do you think you would have any value to us? A lightning bolt seemed to strike Alex. The world around him stopped. The screams, the crying, the sound of objects breaking, everything disappeared. In his head, only Lucy's last sentence echoed. If it weren't for this child, do you think you would have any value to us? Use value. The child. A terrible suspicion, a thought he had never dared to consider before, sprouted in his mind like a monster. He turned slowly. His gaze no longer showed anger, only a terrifying coldness. He looked toward the bedroom where Matthew slept, the child he had been proud of to everyone, his son, the child who bore his last name, his heir. Did he really look like him, or was it just his imagination? Lucy, seeing his expression, had a bad feeling. She realized her mistake and tried to correct it. No, I didn't mean that. I was just angry and spoke without thinking. But Alex no longer heard her. He stood up silently without saying a word, went to his office and locked the door. That night, while Lucy and the child slept, he stealthily slipped into the bedroom. He didn't look at the child with a father's eyes, but with an investigator's. Carefully, he collected a few fine hairs from the child's pillow and wrapped them in a clean tissue. Then, he pulled out one of his own hairs. He held the two samples in his hand, his heart pounding. He had to know the truth. At any cost, he had to know this final truth. The following days passed in a hellish atmosphere. Alex and Lucy did not exchange a word. He moved around the house like a shadow while she lived in fear, not daring to ask what he had done that night. Alex spent most of his time in front of the computer, not working, but constantly refreshing his personal email. He was waiting for the final verdict on his tragic life. He had sent the 2 hair samples to a prestigious DNA testing center via an anonymous courier service. They promised him the results by email in 3 business days. Every second of waiting was torture. He couldn't sleep. He visibly lost weight. His beard grew uncontrollably. He looked like he had aged 10 years. Occasionally, he unconsciously looked at Matthew playing. He tried to find some familiar trait in the child's face, something that resembled him, but the more he looked, the stranger the child seemed. His smile, his gaze, nothing looked like him. On the afternoon of the 3rd day, as he sat absently, a new email notification appeared on the screen. Alex's heart stopped. Sender, Forensic Genetics Center. Subject, DNA. Test results, refs. His hand trembled as he moved the mouse toward the email. He took a deep breath, gathered all his courage, and clicked. There was an attached PDF file. He opened it. The report was presented in a cold, scientific manner, a series of genetic markers, complex technical terms he didn't understand. But he didn't need to understand them. His eyes were glued to the final conclusion in bold and neatly framed. Analysis and conclusion. Based on the analysis of 24 STR genetic markers, the comparison between the sample of the alleged father, Alex Thorne, and the sample of the child, Matthew Miller, shows discrepancies in 15 genetic loci. According to genetic identification standards, we reach the following conclusion. The sample of the alleged father and that of the child show no biological, paternal, filial relationship, no kinship relationship. Those few words were like a hammer blow to Alex's head. In that instant, his world shattered. All sounds disappeared. He didn't hear the television in the living room or Matthew's laughter. He only heard the demented roar in his own chest. He had lost his career, his reputation, his money. He had lost the woman who truly loved him. And now he had lost the last thing he clung to, the pride of having a son to continue his lineage. It was all a farce, a perfect play in which he was both the victim and a stupid supporting actor. He had been deceived not only with money and love, but had been made to raise another man's son. That humiliation was more painful than the divorce from Eleanor, more terrible than facing jail. A dry, chilling laugh erupted from his throat. He began to laugh louder and louder, more dementedly. He laughed at his own stupidity, at the brazenness of those who had deceived him, at his miserable life. Tears streamed from his eyes, mixing with his savage laughter. He buried his head in the keyboard, his broad shoulders trembling violently. He was once at the top. He had everything. But because of a wrong decision, because of greed and selfishness, he had destroyed it all with his own hands. And now, he had nothing left, absolutely nothing. Alex Thorne's collapse was faster than anyone could have imagined. After the final shock about the child's paternity, he became an empty shell. He no longer argued or shouted. He kicked Lucy and the child out of the apartment, not with anger, but with a terrifying silence. He had lost everything. The architecture firm fired him to avoid problems. Former partners turned their backs on him. His friends avoided him. His accounts were frozen. He faced an avalanche of lawsuits from the developer and clients. The luxurious apartment was about to be foreclosed by the bank. From being a talented architect at the top, he plummeted into the abyss with no safety net. In his darkest, most desperate days, when neither alcohol nor cigarettes could soothe his pain, the only image that appeared in his mind was that of Eleanor. Not the Eleanor of now, the brilliant and unattainable silk soul, but the Eleanor of the past, the tender, understanding wife who was always by his side in the most difficult moments. She was his last hope. With his last ounce of strength, he went to her mansion. He no longer wore expensive suits, only a wrinkled, faded shirt, sloppy pants, a week's growth of beard, messy hair, and sunken, bloodshot eyes. He looked like a beggar. He couldn't even get past the gate. The security guard looked at him with contempt and blocked his way. He had to stand on the other side of the street, waiting in silence, hoping to see her. He waited from morning until nightfall. When the streetlights began to turn on, the familiar black Bentley finally returned. When the car stopped at the gate, he ran toward it. Eleanor Vance had just stepped out of the car. Seeing Alex's state, she showed no surprise, as if she had expected it. Her gaze was calm, without the slightest alteration. The chauffeur and the security guard tried to intervene, but Eleanor shook her head. She motioned for them to stand back and looked at the man before her. "What do you want from me?" Her voice was distant and cold, as if speaking to a complete stranger. That distance shattered the last vestige of pride Alex had left. He looked at her, so beautiful and elegant as always, and then looked at himself in the car's reflection. The cruel contrast completely broke him. He said nothing. He simply, slowly, and deliberately knelt down in the middle of the luxurious street, under the yellowish light of the streetlights. The man who was once the personification of pride, for the first time in his life, bent his knee. His tears fell. They were no longer feigned. They were the tears of a truly defeated man. Eleanor, I'm sorry, he began to say, his voice broken and choked by sobs. I know it's too late, but I truly was wrong. He told her everything, how he was used by Lucy and her father, the illegal business, how he blindly believed in a false love, and finally confessed the most painful and humiliating truth. That child is not my son. I've been raising another man's son. Eleanor, I'm an idiot, a real clown. He lifted his tear-drenched face, looking at her with total despair, like a wounded beast begging for mercy. I've lost everything. My career, my reputation, my friends, everything. I'm going to jail. Eleanor, I'm not asking you to forgive me. I just ask you for the years we were married. Help me this time. Just this once, save me. His plea echoed in the silence, pathetic and weak. He had discarded all his dignity with the only hope of clinging to a ray of hope from the woman he had once ruthlessly abandoned. Eleanor Vance remained there in silence, listening to every confession, every plea from Alex. The night wind gently ruffled her clothes. In her eyes there was neither the glee of a victor nor pity for a loser. There was also no trace of hatred, only an extraordinary calm, like the surface of a lake after a storm, flat and crystalline. The man kneeling at her feet was once her whole world, but now, to her, he was nothing more than a pitiable stranger, a faded memory. She spoke slowly, her voice clear and cold, devoid of emotion. Get up, Alex. He looked at her, a glimmer of hope in his eyes. Eleanor, you... But her next sentence annihilated that hope. Your downfall today is not my doing. I never intended to take revenge on you. She looked him straight in the eyes, her voice clear and articulate. Everything you are suffering is the consequence of your own greed and your own decisions. You chose to betray. You chose the illegal path. You chose to believe lies. You yourself have destroyed your life. Don't blame anyone else. Alex was speechless. Her words were not an emotional condemnation, but an objective and cruel truth. She didn't even consider him a rival worthy of revenge. That indifference was more painful than 1,000 insults. But our years together, he stammered. That relationship, Eleanor said softly, ended the day you brought another woman and her child into our home. I will not help you, but I will not harm you either. Let justice take its course. He who makes a mistake must assume responsibility. That is fair. Having said that, she crossed the gate. The heavy iron door closed slowly with a dry creak, like a blade cutting the last thread that bound them. Alex remained kneeling in the deserted street, a solitary and pathetic figure. He knew that everything was truly over. A week later, the final hearing of their divorce took place. The atmosphere in the courtroom was solemn and cold. There were no dramatic arguments or tearful accusations. Everything proceeded quickly and orderly. Eleanor, as the plaintiff, sat with her back straight and her face calm. She wore an elegant beige suit. Alex, as the defendant, was haggard, his eyes empty, like a puppet whose strings had been cut. When the judge declared that based on irrefutable evidence the divorce was granted, Alex did not react. Eleanor received the judgment from her lawyer, signing the necessary documents with firm, decisive strokes. When finished, she stood up and, without looking at Alex even once, left the room with her lawyer. The door opened, flooding the hallway with the bright noon light. Eleanor squinted and took a deep breath of the fresh air. She was completely free. Whatever happened to Alex from that moment on, the sentences he had to face no longer had anything to do with her. An immense sky opened before her, waiting for her to spread her wings. Justice may take time, but it never fails. The fate of Alex and the Miller family was the clearest proof of this. After the divorce, the evidence of financial crimes gathered by Carmen Ruiz's team was officially handed over to the authorities. A large-scale investigation began. The curtain cover in their dirty conspiracies finally fell. Faced with irrefutable evidence, Alex and Lucy's father could no longer blame each other. Together, they had created a network of phantom companies, falsified contracts, and embezzled a huge amount of funds from the San Francisco project. The press, which had once praised Alex, now dedicated itself to uncovering all his crimes and those of the Miller family. Their photos appeared on the front pages with sensational headlines: Genius Architect or Super Swindler. The Miller construction empire collapses due to greed. Before the court, Alex completely collapsed. He admitted all his crimes, lacking the strength to fight. For embezzlement, money laundering, and crimes against territorial planning, he received an exemplary sentence that would bury the best years of his life behind bars in a prison. Lucy's father, as the mastermind, faced a similar sentence. The construction company he had built throughout his life declared bankruptcy and all its assets were seized to pay compensation. As for Lucy Miller, although she did not participate directly in the crimes, her role as accomplice, cover-up, and beneficiary did not exempt her from justice. During the investigation, an even more scandalous truth came to light. Her true lover, Matthew's biological father, was the company's deputy director. A married man, it turned out that Lucy and her lover had planned everything from the start. They took advantage of Alex's naivety and ambition, making him the perfect pawn to cover up their illicit relationship and simultaneously the tool for their fraudulent businesses. The love she had professed for Alex was only a meticulously calculated farce. When everything was discovered, her lover fled abroad, leaving her alone to face the consequences. That man's powerful family used their money and influence to distance themselves, leaving Lucy as the sole responsible party. Without money, with her beauty withered and facing a probation sentence and a huge debt, Lucy finally paid the price for her intrigues and greed. Little Matthew, having no one to care for him, was admitted to a social services center. Meanwhile, Mrs. Thorne, Alex's mother, upon learning that her only son was going to jail and her assets had evaporated, could not withstand the shock. She suffered a severe stroke that left her with half her body paralyzed, condemned to spend her final days in a hospital under the care of nurses. Her dream of having a grandson heir and a rich daughter-in-law to support her vanished, leaving only pain and regret in a cold hospital room. Each one reaped what they sowed. The spiral of greed, betrayal, and lies finally self-destructed, restoring peace to the innocent. A few months later, when the noise of the case had subsided, Eleanor Vance's life had fully returned to its brilliant and peaceful orbit. She was no longer interested in the news about those people. For her, they had become complete strangers, dust that the wind had carried away from her life. She dedicated all her energy to her two major projects, the exhibition space in the Crystal View and the restoration of the Silk Village of New Harmony. Under her direction, the Phoenix Rises project was an unimaginable success. The Silk Village rose from its ashes. The old houses were restored, preserving their original charm. The workshops were modernized. The old looms once again resonated with the clatter of needles. Eleanor convinced the last master artisans in the village to stay, offering them a good salary and an ideal work environment so they could pass on their almost lost techniques. She opened free classes that attracted many young people passionate about the craft. The village not only became an exclusive production center for Silk Soul, but also an attractive destination for cultural tourism. The project not only brought economic benefits, but most importantly, brought life back to a cultural value on the brink of extinction. The reputation of Silk Soul reached a new level, not just a luxury brand, but a brand with conscience and deep human value. The Eleanor of now was completely transformed. She was no longer the housewife confined to the kitchen, nor the iron woman always on the defensive. She had found the perfect balance in her work. She was a decisive leader, a creative artist. Outside of work, she was herself again. She dedicated time to reading, having tea, arranging flowers. She traveled alone to distant places, from the Rocky Mountains to the coastal towns of California, seeking inspiration and enriching her soul. She lived a free and full life without attachments. She was not looking for a new relationship, nor did she fear loneliness. She realized that true happiness did not come from a man, but from the fulfillment and peace of her own spirit. She had found herself a better version, stronger and happier than ever. Autumn in Charleston is as beautiful as a watercolor. Golden leaves of the oak trees fall gently onto the old courtyards. Horseshoe arches are reflected in the serene fountains. Eleanor Vance was there on a trip that combined the supervision of a craft project and the search for inspiration for her next collection. After finishing her work, she treated herself to a quiet afternoon, strolling through the Charleston Gardens, one of the most famous historic complexes in the South Carolina. She wore a long sky-blue silk dress, her hair down, and an old analog camera in her hand. She avoided the crowds, choosing the more solitary paths, feeling the delicate harmony between the architecture, the vegetation, and the water. As she stood on a small bridge, watching the colorful fish in a pond, a warm, familiar voice sounded behind her. "If I'm not mistaken, this is how a true artist finds inspiration." Eleanor turned around. A slight surprise appeared in her eyes. A few steps away from her, smiling gently, was Ricardo Montoya. He was not wearing a business suit, but at a light gray jacket and casual pants. He seemed less like the president of a large group and more approachable and relaxed. "Mr. Montoya, what a coincidence. Are you in Charleston too?" Ricardo walked closer and leaned on the railing beside her. "I have an artistic boutique hotel project here. I come from time to supervise it, and also to escape the hustle and bustle of New York. It seems we share hobbies." They said nothing more, simply contemplating the scene in silence. But it wasn't an uncomfortable silence, quite the opposite. It seemed that both understood and respected the other's space. A moment later, Ricardo broke the silence. "Your project in the New Harmony Village, I've heard about it. Very meaningful work. You're not only a talented artist, but also a person with a great heart." Eleanor shook her head. "I only do what I believe is right. The arts of embroidery gave me everything. I had to do something to give back to its roots." They started walking together through the winding corridors and well-kept gardens. Their conversation did not revolve around business or million-dollar contracts. They talked about the Southern architecture, the meaning of the antique tiles, how the light and shadow changed on the water throughout the day. Ricardo possessed a deep knowledge of culture and art. His interpretations were always fresh and fascinating, and Eleanor, with her artist's eye, saw the subtle beauty, the hidden emotions in every corner that a common person might overlook. They were two kindred spirits who found comprehension and a resonance in each other that did not require many words. Passing by a tapestry hall, Ricardo stopped in front of one that depicted a lion, an eagle, and a deer, symbols of nobility and strength. He looked at Eleanor, his gaze deep and sincere. "Seeing you today, I truly understand the meaning of the word elegance. It doesn't come from designer clothes or expensive jewelry. It comes from the strength after overcoming the storm, from the peace after letting go of resentment. Miss Vance, I deeply admire you." His words were not empty flirtation. They were recognition, a respect that came from the heart. For the first time, a man saw through her interior, admiring her not for being the rich silk soul, but for simply being Eleanor Vance. A warm and gentle feeling spread through Eleanor's heart. She smiled slightly, a truly radiant smile, as clear as the autumn sun. "Thank you, Mr. Montoya." They didn't talk about the future, didn't make promises. It was just an afternoon walking together, sharing thoughts on art and life. But a delicate spark, built on the foundation of understanding and respect, seemed to ignite in the tranquil and ancient atmosphere of the Charleston Gardens. Eleanor Vance returned to her Manhattan mansion one weekend afternoon. The golden light of the sunset streamed through the large window, tinting the entire space. She prepared a pot of jasmine tea, its pure aroma filling the room. She stood by the window with the warm cup in her hand, silently contemplating the city skyline. The skyscrapers stood proud. The traffic flowed incessantly. New York was still as vibrant and bustling as ever, but the observer's perspective had completely changed. In her mind, there were no longer images of Alex or Lucy. Those people, those stories, had truly become the past, like a nightmare that, although leaving scars, no longer causes pain. She had learned to forgive, not them but herself, so she could move forward with lightness. A fleeting thought about the afternoon in Charleston, about the man with the deep gaze and the kindred soul, drew a faint smile to her lips. It was a beautiful encounter, a future possibility, but she expected nothing and was not in a hurry. Her happiness no longer depended on having a man by her side. She had found herself a better, stronger, and happier version. She set down the cup and went up to the third floor to her private studio. The space was always tidy and quiet, the smell of new silk and sandalwood mixed, creating an atmosphere that calmed her soul. She approached an empty easel where a prepared pearwood embroidery hoop rested. She did not choose brightly colored silks, but pulled out a piece of immaculate, highest quality white silk, as soft and smooth as a baby's skin, With her long, slender hands, she carefully stretched the fabric onto the hoop. Every movement was expert and focused. The white fabric lay perfectly smooth without a single wrinkle, like a blank page, waiting for a new story to be written. She sat down and opened her box of embroidery threads, hundreds of silk spools of every imaginable shade, neatly arranged and shimmering under the light. She was not hasty in choosing. She simply observed them in silence as ideas and lines began to form in her mind. What would she embroider on this fabric? A fire phoenix rising, a symbol of her rebirth, a pure white magnolia, a symbol of inner peace, or a majestic landscape of mountains and rivers, a symbol of her freedom. She didn't know, and she didn't need to decide at that moment. Her life was now like that white fabric. The shape and color the future would take depended entirely on her choice, on her own hands. She chose a spool of turquoise blue thread, the color of hope and new beginnings. With nimble fingers, she threaded the silver needle. Under the warm yellow light, Eleanor leaned in with a straight back and a concentrated gaze. She plunged the first stitch into the pure white silk, one stitch, and then another. Slow, steady, and full of confidence. She was embroidering with her own hands a tapestry of her own future, a brilliant, free future decided by herself.